Hello guys, this is What About Nintendo. Today I'm here for another video on The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2. In this video, I'm going to be going over 5 things that I think the sequel can do better than the original Breath of the Wild. So let's get right on into it. So Breath of the Wild is indeed one of the highest rated games of all time. It is widely considered to be one of the best games this decade, and it is one of my personal favorite video games of all time. However, there's still a lot of things that this game didn't do quite as strong as I think it should. There's still a lot of ways that the second game can improve over the original, and that's what I'm going to be going over in this video. So let's hit right on into these topics. The first thing I think that the sequel can do better is more enemy variety. The Breath of the Wild enemy variety is just not very big at all. There's a few basic enemies. There's a lot of really just standard Zelda enemies that are completely missing, and most of the enemies in this game are just reskins of existing enemies. When you defeat, the Divine Beast, then you get new skins of the enemies that are stronger. They're just a different color, slightly different design. They're stronger, but they just really only have more health and do more damage. They're not really any different in their actual AI or anything like that. And it's kind of one of the low points of the game in my opinion. I want more enemy types in this game, and not just more enemy types, but I like the specific types that actually change up how you fight compared to normal enemies, because a lot of enemies in Breath of the Wild are just kind of hack and slash. You don't really have to think too much about fighting them, but in previous Zelda games, it was like fighting an enemy was almost a puzzle in and of itself, and I loved that about previous Zelda games. Kind of had to figure out what you had to do in order to defeat an enemy, or at least defeat it more efficiently. And there is some of that in Breath of the Wild that's mostly missing in most of the enemies. I like more enemies like Armos, Beamos, the Likes, Helmasaurs, Dodongos, Redeads, Dekubabas, Pose, and many more to come back in this game. The more enemies you have, the more you can actually build on those mechanics that they introduced, those many different types of ways to kill an enemy. The more enemies there are, the more you can get creative with these methods. So I think it's a way to really enhance the combat in Breath of the Wild. The second thing I think that Breath of the Wild can do better is sort of like the first, but slightly different. This is about overworld bosses. So when I said the enemy variety needs to be better, I didn't just mean for the normal standard enemies, I mean for the overworld bosses as well. The overworld bosses in Breath of the Wild are great. They're awesome. They're super fun and they're super cool, but there's just not that many of them. There's not much variety. There's what, 4 or 5 of them in total, and that's it? Not that many. I think there's a bunch more that we could see in the game. We could see things like Moldorms, Peahats from Ocarina of Time, Darknuts, Iron Knuckles, Gomas, and more. I think would be, the same kind of things I was saying before. Add new ways to fight them, make them more like puzzles in the way you fight them as well, and just, adding more character variety, more enemy variety adds to the base mechanics of the game. Number 3 is actually a really big one for me, and that is more cities and bigger cities. I really love the towns in Breath of the Wild. There's just not that many of them, and they're not very big. This seems to be a running theme for these things that I'm changing. It has them, but they're just could be a lot better. Now that there's been a time of peace in Hyrule where Ganon isn't around, we're not sure exactly how long in between these games, but I suspect at least a few years in between. And at the end of Breath of the Wild, we know their main goal was to rebuild Hyrule. Zelda said it herself, that was the main objective, was to rebuild Hyrule to its former glory. So I imagine a lot of that rebuilding will have taken place, and maybe taking place along the entire game. Existing towns should have grown in size, and new towns should be built. I would love it if they do some really grand towns that are really just super imaginative. I think the first time I went to Zora's Domain, I was kind of blown away by how beautiful, how just fancy and very creative in the way that they thought that up. I thought that Rito Village was also very creative. So more things like that, more very creative, not just kind of the standard towns. This is a medieval fantasy game. This is a game where anything could be, imagined up, and there could be really crazy, wacky places to go to and explore. So I want, not only do I want the towns that are existing to expand, but I want new creative towns to be made. Number 4, I know, is a big one for us longtime Zelda fans, and that is real dungeons. The dungeons in the Breath of the Wild, well, straight up, they really weren't great. They felt like just big, larger shrines. They were cool, and they definitely felt like big shrines, like they were cool in that aspect, but they weren't dungeons. I want more traditional type dungeons in this game. I'd also like it if it was more like older, more like 2D Zelda games where you kind of like, you know, the general location of where a dungeon might be, but you could just run across a dungeon randomly. You could just be exploring and all of a sudden you're like, oh, that is a dungeon entrance. Like, you kind of know that there might be a dungeon nearby, but you, at the same time, it's not like exactly marked like it is in Breath of the Wild where you know exactly where each dungeon is. I want the dungeons to be themed, heavy in puzzles, as well as themed enemies, and be more room to room like standard dungeons. I also want puzzles that use more than just the Sheikah Slate, or whatever abilities you have in this game. Leave those puzzles for shrines, or whatever Breath of the 2 shrines equivalents are. For this, I want to use my bows, my torch, maybe even push some blocks, who knows? But more traditional Zelda puzzles should be in these dungeons. And finally, I'd like a better story. The story in the Breath of the Wild is actually really cool, but it's presented terribly. It's just not presented well at all. If we had actually played through the past of Breath of the Wild and learned about all the plot twists naturally, the story would have been amazing. Or even if we had learned slowly over time what happened in a more linear way, that would have been great as well. But no, we got literally every major plot twist explained to us in the first couple of hours, with the memories only showing us a bit more than what we already knew. In this game, however, things should be different. There is no past. There is no 100 years ago where all the cool stuff happened. Now it's the future. It's what's going to happen. The plot twist should unravel naturally as we go along. We should be learning things naturally as we play through the game. So they have a chance here to really make the story great if they do it right. Have some plot twists, have some crazy things that go down. Just don't explain it all to us in the first, hour of the game before we even get off the Great Plateau. As a part of this, I would love it if story progression was tied to dungeon progression, and if the overworld actually changed as the story goes along. Not specific events for specific dungeons, but more like you beat your first dungeon, the first event happens. You beat your second dungeon, whichever one that might be, the second event happens, and so on and so forth. The types of changes I'm thinking are like a cutscene plays where you see Ganondorf growing stronger. You see him get closer maybe to his original form rather than his zombified form. You see him create new enemy types to plague you on your adventure, and they're now roaming the world. Unlike in Breath of the Wild where this just happens and you don't really know until you happen to run into an enemy, and well, they're pretty disappointing because they're just reskins of that same enemies you already fought. Or perhaps a cutscene happens where enemies raid a village and now that village is gone or needs to be repaired, so there's new side quests there, new things to do, and new reasons to go explore maybe a place you've already been to. Or find a place that you haven't been to if you happen to have not gone to that area yet before. I'd also like it if the villagers seemed more and more concerned about what's happening instead of just being completely oblivious. It should be more like Majora's Mask, where the villagers started acting differently the closer to the moon got to the earth. These kind of changes really make it feel like an actual bad event is coming, unlike a Breath of the Wild where it was like, yep, every day is just the same. It kind of felt like you could explore as much as you wanted and Ganon was never gonna do anything. Now obviously I don't want you to actually be worried about, having a time limit or anything like that in Majora's Mask, because I do want you to just explore freely and take all the time you want to go, do everything you need, but I would like it if the story felt like that's what was happening. Like, it felt like if you waited another day, Ganon might come to full power and destroy everything. I want that sense of dread. I want that sense of inevitability. It just makes the game feel that much more real in that sense that there's actually a real danger. But yeah guys, those are the 5 things that I think that Breath of the Wild sequel could do a lot better than the original Breath of the Wild. But I'd like to know what all you guys think down in the comments below. Is there any improvements you'd like to see over the original Breath of the Wild in this sequel? And what did you think of the improvements that I proposed in this video? Also, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell icon for notifications of all my videos, because there's going to be tons more Zelda Breath of the Wild theories and predictions coming from this channel, as well as other Nintendo-themed content. Also, share this video with everyone you know who's hyped for Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel. And I'll see all you awesome people later on What About Nintendo. Bye!